Hi everyone! Welcome to my first ever drawing tutorial video. First, what is a block-in? A block-in typically means that an artist is utilizing an initial envelope or contour of their subject matter and then breaking it down further by using light shapes, shadow shapes, and occasionally halftone shapes to represent whatever subject they're trying to draw. For example, this is a finished block-in. This was done using primarily light shapes and shadow shapes with a little bit of halftone shapes to describe what I was looking at. And this was the finished painting that resulted from it. But when I was a student, I found myself really confused as to what to do whenever my subject matter became more difficult. So for the purposes of this video, I'm going to be referring to dominant shapes. And the reason being is because if I were to just say to draw this cast with shadow shape and light shape only, it would look something like this. I don't know about you guys, but I don't find this particularly helpful when trying to render a drawing. So instead, we're going to go for something more like this. This is much more all-encompassing. This uses shadow shape, light shape, as well as contours within the cast, not just on the outside edges, and it uses a variety of halftones. We're going to include dark halftones that basically group with the shadows, and we're going to include light halftones that group with the lights, and we're going to do everything and anything we can to just make sense of this cast. So with all that being said, let's go ahead and see how we got to the final product. Let's get started. So I'll have a reference image of the cast I'm drawing up on the screen. To start, I'm not going to be precious with it. I set my parameters as you would in any block-in. First things first, I'm going to get a few of the internal big shapes. So this shadow shape in the man's, at the top of the man's head. I want to get a feel for the internal shapes so that I can start relating things, because the outside shape is pretty simple. I'm just going to build context for myself. Building context is super important whenever you're working on these kinds of things. I think giving myself context without committing, that's the big thing. And the main reason for that is because it's really easy to get attached to information. When I'm choosing what to draw internally, it's just what's the most dominant. So while her face is very beautiful and, I'm excited to get into drawing it, and all of these forms in her back and the fabric right here are all beautiful, they're not the most dominant forms. So I don't need to worry about those right now. I just need to worry about the heavy, dominant forms. Okay, so the reason I keep focusing on dominant shapes is because that is the simplest way to break down such a complex item. And this pertains to any block-in, whether you're blocking in a cast, a still life, a person, just focusing on the things that, if you were to step back, what draws your attention? So if you're to step back 20 feet or look through a reduction glass, what is drawing your eye? That's what you want to focus on, to just simplify things and break things down for yourself. The other way to approach that is by using tonal shapes. So I'm using the dominant shapes and I'm blocking them in tonally. I'm going to go ahead, continue in this stage, breaking things down into smaller pieces, keeping them vague, keeping everything flexible, and I'll check back in with you guys when it's time to advance to the next step. Okay, so I'm just popping back in. We're still in the same stage, but I'm popping back in to show you guys that there's nothing new really happening. Everything is still very vague, very flexible. All of it could easily be erased, but I'm just adding more. I'm giving myself more to work with. I'm trying to get in some of these more halftone shapes that do have a very a strong visual effect. And for reference, I'm using this. This is just a reduction glass. I will leave a link below in the description if you guys are interested in ordering one yourself, but I find them very useful. Okay, so now we're ready to get more refined. We have our general shapes locked in. Now we want to get them specific. So the other thing that I want to mention is I have, by this stage, gone ahead and taken a half. I've taken a vertical half as well as a horizontal half. I got those in just so that I could be sure that my general shapes were in the right spot. If these would have illuminated that things needed to shift dramatically, I would have gone ahead and done so. But since it seems like it's pretty close right now, I think it's time to start refining and getting more specific. The other thing I'll reinforce, when you're working on something so complicated, don't get bogged down in confusing lines. Anytime my lines are getting too dark, especially in the areas that are facing the light, so these really like bright white light moments like on the arm, or all these really compressed moments for the female figure's back and neck and stuff, I like to tap those back with my kneaded eraser. Just tap, 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 tap. And that is so that it serves a dual purpose. One, keeps them light and easy to move, since I'm not sure they're in the right place yet. Whenever I lighten them, they also get visually closer to what I'm looking at. So I don't see them as heavy, dark shadows, and so I don't want to draw them that way. So I try to keep things relative. So my calf shadows are still pretty light, so I want to make sure that all of these other lines are even lighter. So I'm popping back in to show you that while it looks like I might have made a lot of progress since the last time I showed you guys the image, the reality is I'm still doing the same thing. All I'm doing is working big to little. So I got the envelope in, then I placed the figures and the dominant shapes. After I placed the figures and dominant shapes, now I can break those shapes down into smaller ones, so I can start to focus on the fabric folds and the other things that are standing out. And this is the method that I'm going to use until everything is in. Until everything is in, this is what I'm going to continue to do. So that means that until I have this thumb placed, which I'm going to make a little mark for now, and until I have this curve and this space really worked out, I'm not going to progress to doing features or to breaking down any of this further. At this point, I'm just continuing to correct my shapes, and every time I correct them, I can get them slightly more specific. For instance, the head was too small, so now I'm going through around, making it bigger. I went ahead and I made this edge more refined, and by taking these steps, I'm making small corrections, but I'm also getting more refined with each pass. But at this point, I would still consider myself in a stage where everything can be erased. And now's really the time to pay attention to those edges, because now we have plenty of context. And with this much context, now there's no excuse to not get this outside edge correct. At this point, you don't want to move too quickly, or things will easily become out of hand. You want to just really sit back, look at how every little shape can be improved upon, and go from there. One thing I find really helpful when blocking in at every stage is looking for animal shapes. There's a lot of great resources out there on finding animal shapes and going over that topic, so I'll just go over it briefly. When I'm looking at this larger image of the male figure, when I abstract it and I kind of blur my eyes or use my reduction glass, I see a dog's head. So this is the dog's nose, this is the eye, this is the ear. That is really helpful for finding the big picture, but it's also really helpful in these like refining stages, because I can really see, oh well, does my dog look like that dog? Using things like that can really help you get a more accurate drawing. If we were to break the block in down into 3 parts of beginning, middle, and end, we're ready to start the end section. So to just briefly go over what I consider those 3 stages to be, I would say that the first step, you're just getting everything placed you want, no detail. The middle step is starting to make your block in resemble the thing you're trying to block in. It is making an effort to get more specific without, again, truly committing to anything, but it's a way to advance the drawing, because if you stay in the beginning stage of just placing and shifting and maneuvering, the issue is you can get kind of stuck there. And the middle stage is about, it's kind of, I guess you could call it the ugly stage. It's about getting that information in, pushing for more information, getting the image closer to what you're seeing, and being okay with the fact that things still need to move, being okay with the fact that it might look a little awkward, because you are just trying to keep placing things. The next stage in the block-in, step 3, is the finishing stage. So this is where you want to pick an area and start refining. Where we're at, and for something this complex, you want your stages 2 and 3 to kind of overlap. You want to get more specific, but you still want to be able to erase it. Because if you don't erase it, if you aren't willing to erase what you're working on, then what you're going to have is maybe a beautifully rendered portrait in the wrong spot. One thing I want to make abundantly clear with this video is that I am making it because I found that whenever I was early on in my drawing education, and even to a degree while I was in the middle of it, I found that I just lacked a good process. And so I would get stuck in moments of working on a block-in or working on any project. So I've learned to break things down into steps and stages so that I have a frame of reference. Whenever I'm working on something, especially something that's more complex, I need to be able to have a method to the madness. The reason I work section by section is simply because I find it more efficient and it drives me to a finish faster. I think it's really hard to continue to work all over all at once and finish something. When I'm working on a stage like this, you might notice that I'm not including every little hair carving mark that I see. I will include more than what I have now. This is not quite enough. But in the hair, I'm not going to include any of the lines that go away when I squint. And that's because for my typical resolution level of my work, like the finish I bring it to, they aren't strictly necessary. I wanted to make a note about the things that I leave out so that I can make it clear that just because this is how I go about my block-in process doesn't mean that it would be different if you were to include every single strand of hair. It would take a little bit more time, but the actual process is the same. And that even goes for people who include even less than I do, or if like it's a shorter form project and you don't have as much time to spend getting a very detailed and rendered block-in. The processes are all the same. It's just about what a specific project calls for as to what you want to include, what you might want to leave out. I want to get really descriptive with my shadows now, with my shadow shapes rather, and I want it to be clear what they're describing instead of having them be more general. This is like really final stage block-in stuff where now everything is in place, no big changes are going to happen, or even really that many small changes, so you're just finishing it. So I'm finally starting to work on the portrait and get this placed, and at this stage I'm just trying to use whatever abstract shapes I can to help find the right proportion. I think this just about takes us to the end of this block-in. I hope this video has been helpful for you guys, and if there's any other art tutorial style videos that you'd like to see, just let me know, and I will try to make many more as time goes on, but for now I think that we'll leave it there.